As an administrator, one of the things that I did personally was I monitored the department and I paid attention to what they were doing. I was invested in it as well, but I didn't direct it. So my role was more as a participant when I attended things. When I went to Keystone meetings, when I went to Inquiry Tuesdays, I sat down and participated with them. I didn't stand in front and lead. And that built trust, I think, between administration and the teachers, where they felt that they were supported in taking risks. So I think administration here, moving into a collegial role and to be part of the department, valuing their work but not telling them what to do, that was a shift. And so that was important. The other thing is they really started with looking at instruction and aligned to assessment. So they started out really looking at midterms and final exams and saying, okay, let's look at each question and what depth of knowledge was that question about. And they realized that they weren't asking kids to analyze things. They were doing lower level thinking. And the exciting thing about that discussion came from not let's change question B or whatever. It was, wow, we want kids to do this, and here's what we're testing. We need to make that right. And so they decided, the teachers decided, how are we going to be more student-centered? How are we going to be more analytical with our kids? How are we going to give them the responsibility for learning? And that started a shift in instruction.
They began looking at curriculum. They began looking at their assessments. They began looking at how can we make this better? You and I and someone over here, we all teach the same course. Here's some time where we can sit down and talk about what we're doing it, what works, what's not working, what's not even necessary that we're doing, and we can toss that out as we can focus on what we need to focus on is the essential content.
They're going to think it's going to be this big, and that one question that is at the end is going to be transferred by the time the end of the day comes around. So I'm kind of thinking I might...
One of the first things that we did, and this is probably 4 or 5 years ago now, and it was a simple thing, and it turned out to actually have a pretty powerful impact, was to analyze our final exams. Now, traditionally, an exam analysis meant looking at student data, how they performed, and decide whether questions were good or not good. But what we did was to analyze the actual questions themselves. So, it was a spreadsheet that we had, and we would look at each question and just identify 3 things. We would say what concept was being assessed, what unit in the course it was covered, and then the third thing, and the best part of it, was we identified the rigor level. So for each question, we simply said, is it a knowledge question, is it a skill question, or is it an application question? Knowledge being what do you remember, skill, what can you do, application, what do you understand? And we did that for every question on the exam. And when we're all finished, we have this sheet that has a good snapshot of everything. And we could see if the questions were balanced in terms of concepts. But when we looked at the rigor level, in many cases we found that our exams had an overemphasis on recall questions. And it's just, what do the kids remember? And that bothered us because, science is about application, about understanding concepts, and yet we are assessing factual recall. And, so the idea is, what's more important? Is it more important that a student understands a concept or that the student knows what it's called? And we decided, it's more important that they understand. So by doing that, we started making revisions. We would revise the questions from recall and make them more application-based. And in doing that, that drove other things, completely unintentional at the time, but it drove other things, because if our final exam is application-based, our regular classroom tests need to be application-based. So those changes started to be made. If our regular tests are application-based, our instruction needs to be application-based. And so we started making those changes, and then we share those ideas with each other. And it has really ultimately wound up leading to a quality course that's not just driven by trivial memorization. And the student achievement has gone up across the board because of it.
From that alignment, of the curriculum came up with pacing guides, which was really helpful for, with some students, some teachers, I'm sorry, that have just come in recently. They said that that was helpful for them to kind of get their feet on the ground, as opposed to coming in and saying, here's a textbook, we cover, these chapters, to know eligible content that's geared towards the state test, and saying everything we do matches up with that, and these are the labs that would address it, and these are the misconceptions that students have had from past teachers sharing it. So I think the alignment was a big piece, and it was something that was directed or came from the teachers themselves. It was a group of 4 teachers of various levels of teaching and years of experience that kind of came and developed the common assessments and the pacing guide and the documents that are now open for all teachers to utilize.
We started to get into constructed response questions, and in one of the Keystone meetings we were able to pair off and say, okay, you guys are going to worry about the anchor of cell division, you guys are going to worry about the anchor of bioenergetics, so on and so forth, so that when we had our next in-service day, we could sit down and in a round-robin style pass around all these constructed response questions and start to critique those constructed response questions to get them into the formatting of the Keystones, and then into the difficulty level of the Keystones. And from there we had maybe, I want to say, like 18 different open-ended questions that we could use then for our students to practice, and then from there we could end up putting them on our test, so that when the students got to the Keystones, it wasn't the first time they saw these constructed response questions. It was something that was normal for them. And then the next step that we were able to use from that was a common rubric, a common grading rubric. And with that, we came up with responses that the students should have, and basically then saying, like, okay, this was how the students would score on this question, so that we can continue to help the students grow and prepare for the Keystones. As we're creating those questions, it's not focused upon, okay, you need to have this specific answer for, the Keystone. We created those questions in that format, but really the big idea was, are you understanding the content in general? Are you understanding the world around you? And you're able to critically look at the things around you instead of just answering an open-ended question. Our biggest thing is for the students to understand the process of science and to be able to apply that information and that content to anything and everything in their lives. And because they're able to do that, that's why they usually do so well on the Keystones. Those constructed responses that we had come up with, again, were what we thought was important as a biology department, and in no way could we exactly have the same questions that they had on the Keystones. And usually our third question is more of a concept related to their life that's more broad, and to see what they can tie in, to see how much of the material they actually understand. So them doing well on the Keystone is because of, I guess, our goal of just, we want you to understand science and to apply it in your everyday life.
It has had an enormous impact, because the result of all of this, of us working together, is that there are common expectations in all courses. So we have courses where you might have 5 or 6 people who teach that course, and in the past that might have been 5 or 6 distinctly different courses. But now that we have that collaborative nature, the courses are pretty much the same from teacher to teacher. Sure, we all have our own style, and we're not taking that away, but if you are a student in a particular course, it doesn't matter who your teacher is. The learning opportunities are the same, the expectations are the same.